Hello candle makers, and welcome to this multi-part video series on wick selection and candle safety burn testing. My name is Duncan and I'm the Head of Research and Development at Candle Shack Limited, and I'll be taking you through this course. The wick of the candle is effectively a fuel pump, delivering fuel to the flame via capillary action, in much the same way a rattan reed or a fountain pen works. The heat generated by the flame, or some of it, radiates downwards and melts the solid wax, enabling the supply of fuel to continue in a cycle until the fuel is exhausted or the flame is extinguished. Getting the right balance of fuel delivery, heat, and removing unwanted material, for example the wick itself, through incineration, are the main challenges of selecting candle wicks. To understand how to choose a good wick, we must first understand a little bit about candle flames. Whilst much remains unknown about the exact reactions occurring within a candle flame, there is a lot we do know, and understanding the basics can really help when it comes to candle wick selection and burn testing. This diagram shows a stable candle flame and the different zones that exist within the flame. The blue zone is often called the blue zone. It is deficient of oxygen, being in the centre of the flame, and tends to have a temperature around 800 degrees centigrade. This is where the fuel is vaporised. To prove the presence of vapour, we can extinguish a candle flame and quickly relight the vapour as it is still being delivered to the wick. In the orange zone, often called the dark zone, pyrolysis occurs, which is the breaking apart of the vaporised fuel molecules. Minute particles of carbon are created as a result. These rise into the yellow zone, usually called the luminous zone. The carbon fuel is partially burnt here, but not completely, and larger carbon particles, which can be considered as soot, can form in this part of the flame. If the temperature of the luminous zone exceeds 1000 degrees centigrade, usually at the tip, most of the carbon is completely burned, and little or no visible soot can be seen coming off of the flame. In a steady flame, the veil, or the non-luminous zone, is where the luminous zone meets the air, and is thus the hottest part of the flame. Soot particles are completely oxidised if the flame is stable and the veil is intact. So, a stable flame is required for a soot-free candle, as well as a balanced system of fuel delivery, vaporisation, and combustion. The most commonly used category of wick found in container candles today is the flat wick. Although wicks may actually look round, most are flat, and if you were to strip the wax coating off, this flatness would be quite obvious. All of the wicks sold in the Candle Shack online store are flat wicks. These include CL series, Eco, V, VRL, LX, PGS, and all the others. There are other types of wicks of course, such as round wicks, the Wido RRD is an example of this, or square wicks, which are often used in beeswax or outdoor citronella candles, but we will focus on the flat wick during this course. Wicks are generally made from several bunches of cotton threads, sometimes supported with other materials, all of which are braided or knitted together using sophisticated machinery. Whilst a wick may look to the casual observer to be just a piece of string, the reality is that candle wicks are extremely complex braidings made to exacting standards. To see an example of this, just visit Wido's website and watch the video on their homepage. So, with a perfect, or at least suitable wick in our candle, the flame will be stable and generate enough heat to fully melt the wax, and in the case of a scented candle, create enough heat in this liquid wax for the perfume to evaporate into the room. As the candle burns down, the wick will remain in the veil long enough to be completely incinerated. This is where the term self-trimming wick comes from. So, this is what you're aiming for. But whilst it may be simple in theory, achieving it in the real world can be very difficult. A health warning at this stage. No two candles burn exactly the same. If you were to take 10 candles from the same batch and burning in the same room for the same periods of time, there will be some variation in flame height, consumption rate and sooting. This is normal, is fire is inherently chaotic in nature. All you are trying to do as a candle maker is limit this variability to ensure that all the candles in the batch burn similarly enough to be safe and to deliver a good customer experience. Variability is the enemy of every serious candle maker, and minimising it should always be your goal. So now let's take a look at some of the things that can go wrong. A candle will generate visible soot when set in a drafty location. This is because a stable flame is required to achieve the temperatures at the interface of the veil and luminous zone to completely oxidise the carbon fuel. This is a very easy fix. Simply tell your customers not to burn their candles where there is a draft or breeze, and it should go without saying never to test your candles in a room which has a draft. When a candle wick is too large, the flame height will usually be larger than usual for a candle of the same size and may flicker. In a medium-sized candle, typically 70 or 80 mm in diameter, a flame bigger than 35 or 40 mm in height is usually a sign of overwicking. With extra fuel being delivered to the wick and the system being unstable, excess soot may form clubs on the end of the wick. In extreme cases, the wick may curl back into the wax, forming a bridge, especially in softer waxes such as soy. This is quite a dangerous thing to happen and can lead to a very large flame and high levels of sooting. Finally, the rate of consumption in an overwicked candle will be higher than usual, meaning the candle will burn down more quickly than it should. In a 75 to 80 mm diameter candle, the rate of consumption will usually be greater than 4.5 grams of wax per hour before the wick is deemed to be too large. We will cover rates of consumption in a later video. In a candle that is underwicked, the most obvious signs are a small flame and small melt pool. Again, in a 70 to 80 mm candle, the flame is usually at least 25 mm tall. If it is shorter than this, the chances are your candle is underwicked and there will be insufficient heat to create a suitable melt pool. An underwicked candle will also have a low rate of fuel consumption. This will typically be less than 3.5 grams per hour for a medium candle. If everything else is okay with the system and self-trimming is occurring, this type of candle may well burn to completion, but will leave a lot of hang-up on the walls of the vessel. Whilst not necessarily a safety issue, it is not great for customer satisfaction and should be addressed. With softer waxes, this tunnelling effect may drown the wick as the candle burns down. If the wick is cut too short, the wick will be unable to curl into the veil of the flame and so cannot self-trim. This usually results in clubbing and sooting, but may self-correct if the wick is allowed to burn. The key here is not to over-trim your wicks. This is especially important for thicker wicks, like those used in soy wax, as thicker wicks need more exposed length to curl than thinner wicks. This can seem counterintuitive. If the wick cannot curl, it cannot self-trim. That said, it can be extremely difficult to wick soy wax candles and get them to self-trim, which is why many people include a note to trim the wick to 5 or 10 mm after each burn. When over-trimmed, these candles will still burn, and if burn cycles are kept to a maximum of 3 to 4 hours, the candle can burn all the way down like this. It is not technically the correct way to burn a candle, but it does seem to be a very popular approach, especially with vegetable wax candle makers. Some wicks have very strong support mechanisms, such as paper or metal cores. Cores are not usually braided into the wick, but form a central support around which the braids are arranged. This results in the wick extending up through the dark and luminous zones rather than exiting through the veil of the flame. This can also be caused by impurities in the wax, including some fragrance components, especially resins. The result is often a dim or unstable flame and excessive soot and clubbing, as a result of poor combustion. Pretty much all candle wicks are treated with flame retardant chemicals, usually via a salt bath or borax solution of some description. This is also known as mordanting. This treatment is similar to the treatments undergone by clothing and soft furniture fabrics and is essential for the wick to survive within a candle flame for any length of time. With so many waxes and fragrances on the market, there is a need for many different chemical treatments. In addition to braiding techniques and support systems, chemical treatments are a key differentiator between wick families. Some examples include Wido Eco Wick, which uses Type C, whereas the PGS and TG wick share Wido's Type E treatment. The chemical makeup of these treatments are trade secrets of the various wick manufacturers and are not publicly available. They are, however, essential in candle wicks, and we should be aware of their role. Needless to say, if you see this wick incineration occurring, the best thing to do is to choose a wick from a different family with a stronger treatment. We will explain more about this in the next video. This incineration issue is most common with aggressive oils such as cinnamon and some essential oils, but can also be influenced by wax additives including dye. Conversely, if the chemical treatment is too strong, the wick will not self-trim, even if the flame size and rate of consumption seem normal. This will usually result in the same symptoms as an oversized wick eventually, with clubs forming and the flame size increasing over time. To remedy this, we would choose a different family of wick. More on this in the next video. Good wick posture is essential to get a good burn. Good posture means the wick is perfectly vertical within the candle and that the tension is consistent throughout the length of the wick. The easiest way to guarantee consistent tension and therefore consistent capillary flow is to use a pre-waxed wick. A pre-waxed wick is a wick that has been pre-waxed under tension with a high melt point wax. This process locks the braids in place, resulting in consistent capillary flow and thus provides stability to the system. This coating of high melt point wax protects the wick during filling and also as it sits in the hot melt pool. It is generally a very bad idea to wax your own wick, especially with low melt point waxes such as soy. This may seem more craft-like, but in reality it will usually increase the variability of your products and make it more difficult to control batch-to-batch consistency. If the wick is not perfectly vertical within the vessel, even if the wick curls correctly, the posture of the wick may prevent the tip of the wick from reaching the veil of the flame and thus it cannot trim. This will often result in clubbing, sooting and a dim flame, as the tip of the wick sits within the blue zone or the dark zone. This issue can often be confused or misinterpreted as the wick being too stiff. By looking into the wax melt pool, however, this issue can usually be identified as the wick will be at an angle. This is easy to fix. It is usually down to human error or the wick not being properly secured to the base of the container and coming loose. Wax shrinkage can also cause issues with posture. In this exaggerated example, the wick is contorted and twisted all the way down. This situation is actually more common than you may think and leads to significant burn problems. For many novice candle makers, it is wick posture and not wick selection that causes the majority of batch-to-batch issues. Rapid cooling of candles is a major cause of this twisting effect, as the wax contorts as it cools. Waxes with high plasticity, such as paraffins, tend to be more vulnerable to this. It can, however, be prevented, or at least minimised, by using the following techniques. Firstly, securing the wick at the base. This can be achieved using glue or adhesive pads. We would personally recommend not using glue dots, as they tend to have a very low melt point and have low strength. Using a glue gun with a stick glue is okay, but many of these glues are very hard at room temperature, and if you use a wax that can shrink, this type of glue may shear and your candle may fall out of the jar. Wick pads are more time consuming to use but do offer a good level of adhesion even at low temperatures. Professional manufacturers typically use pressure sensitive adhesives that never fully harden but remain extremely sticky at room temperature. Specialist equipment such as compressed air and glue dispensing machinery are required to use this glue, although there are some handheld glue guns available that will accept pillows of glue rather than sticks. These can, however, be relatively expensive. Second, the wick must be centralised within the candle during cooling. One method of achieving this is to use some sort of wick wire or tool to clamp the wick in a vertical posture. These tools can be made from wood, plastic or metal. Typical examples include chopsticks, clothes pegs, lollipop sticks and a variety of custom-made wick wires. This clamping of the wick at the top prevents the wick from being distorted or pulled down as the wax cools and ensures the wick is perfectly vertical. You do, however, need to watch the pour temperature if using this method, as hot pours, that is, pours that are close to the melt point of the wick wax, can significantly reduce its effectiveness and cause stability issues during the burn. Pouring your wax hot can also cause the glue to soften and the wick to work free from the base, especially if too much upward tension is used when securing the wick at the top of the jar. Be very careful about this. The final, and arguably the best method of ensuring correct posture is by the use of a candle slug, candle core, or whatever else you may wish to call it. These are usually made from unscented candle wax, although they can be scented if you have the machinery to make them. They are usually made from paraffin wax, either pressed, extruded or poured, but can be made from any wax, so long as it isn't too brittle. Cores offer two major advantages over wick wires. They remain in the candle throughout the burn, and they protect the wick wax during filling. Although the core will melt as the candle burns down, their higher melt point provides the wick with enhanced stability, which is particularly useful in container candles where the wax is usually very soft. Whilst a melt pool may look to be 10mm deep, lowering an awl or a skewer into the molten wax will reveal a full depth, which is more typically 35 or even 50mm in depth. This slush that exists below the fully liquid part of the melt pool provides little stability to the wick. By adding a wick core, the wick is generally supported within this slush zone, meaning only around 10mm of wick below the surface of the wax is ever left unsupported. In addition to the benefits during the burn, the core also insulates the wick wax during filling and prevents the wick from being contorted by cooling wax. It is for these reasons that wick cores are used by most luxury candle manufacturers. Although wick cores do provide stability, they do have some drawbacks, and it is up to you to make the decision on whether you use them or not. Firstly, they're almost always made from paraffin wax, so if you are marketing your candles as 100% vegetable, using them may not be an option for you. We and others are looking into vegetable wax cores, but this is challenging as these waxes tend to be brittle. Secondly, paraffin wax has a lower relative density than vegetable wax, so they will tend to float to the surface in 100% vegetable blends. This can be very annoying, trust me. At Candle Shack, we tend to use all of these techniques: pressure sensitive glues, wick cores, particularly in multi-wick containers, and custom made wick wires, all to improve the stability and to reduce the variability in the finished product. You don't need to do all three of these, but hopefully you will now have enough knowledge to make good decisions for your scale of production. So, in summary, choose the right wick for your candle system, insert and support it correctly, and you will create great candles. Choose a bad wick, usually by not testing properly or being sloppy in production, will lead to bad posture and will result in poor quality candles. That's it.